Hello, everyone. Welcome to our special webinar event, Payroll Analytics, How Global Payroll Data Provides the CFO and CHRO with Insights for Better Decision Making. We're absolutely delighted that you've joined us. My name is Tiffany Appleby, and I will be your host for today's session. Before we get started with the event, I have just a few housekeeping items that I would like to share. For any questions that you have during today's session, please use the Q&A box that you'll find on the On24 control panel at the bottom right side of your screen. Our presenters would love to address any questions that you have, and I'll ask these questions of our presenters along the way and also at the conclusion of our planned content. Today's session will be recorded and will be available on demand after the event for access on a continuing basis. And now to introduce you to today's presenters. Conrad Wilson serves as the Data and Analytics Lead at Immedis, and in his role, Conrad is focused on enhancing the analytics available to global payroll departments to help them support their leadership teams. He's perfectly suited for this role as he is passionate around producing actionable insights to lead businesses to informed decision making. And next up, we have Brent Skinner joining us from 360 Insights. He is co-founder, director, and principal analyst. And prior to co-founding 360 Insights, Brent was a principal analyst at Nucleus Research and former technology editor of HRO Today. Brent enjoys exploring the future of work and does so as the host of the HR Tech Chat video podcast and has been quoted in publications such as the Wall Street Journal. And with that, Brent, I will turn it over to you to kick us off with the presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Tiffany, for that introduction, and Conrad and everyone else on the team for having me to co-present today. It's a great honor. I really appreciate it. Just wanted to give folks just a quick sort of understanding of who we are at 360 Insights, and I promise not to take too much time here. But we are an analyst firm, just like any number of analyst firms you've heard of. All analyst firms have a unique sort of lens through which they view or they think about enterprise software. And the way that we look at it is, we will publish case studies and thought leadership and all of that, and we love doing so. But one thing we're very keen on exploring, investigating, and learning as much as we can about for our community's benefit is the decision-making process and how it's changed in enterprise software. Who's involved in deciding what gets purchased and what doesn't get purchased? This is old news in a sense, but 15 years ago it used to be IT driving the bus. That's no longer the case. Those are the older, simpler times. IT is now obviously still involved, but more of a co-pilot with many, many other stakeholders. We've seen this, obviously the CFO involved. At times we even see the CEO involved. With HCM deployments, we've even seen chief operations officers involved in the decision-making process, especially if that technology touches on frontline workers. We've even seen an employee experience council involved in at least one decision-making process, and we published a report called An Anatomy of Decision that looks at all these types of things. Our research is written in the voice of the user for users, and it's free for download for anybody at our website. All you have to do is provide us with your email address, and then you'll get a PDF. We also have a global executive advisory council because we're very interested in getting the feedback and input from the market space on what we're looking at with our content and our research, whether it be our thought leadership or our case studies or whatnot. If you're a director level or above in your field and you're interested in possibly joining our a global executive advisory council, just call it the advisory council from here on out. feel free. Just go to our website and nominate yourself. It's a very, very easy, light lift. You can participate as much or as little as you'd like. You get first view of our research before we publish it, able to provide input if you'd like, and that sort of thing. And these are just a few example members of our council. So without further ado, let's get into the subject matter at hand today. And I'd just like to set the stage, set the tone by sharing with you in the audience a way that we look at HCM. And this has resonated quite a bit in the market space over the past, since we came out with the idea, which is, gosh, well over almost a year and a half ago, or maybe even more than that at this point. It's this idea of, that's the arrow to point, excuse me. It's this idea that there are two hemispheres in human capital management. There is a concrete hemisphere and an abstract hemisphere. And you're wondering, what does that mean? Well, we'll get to that in just a moment here. But first, I want to just say that people have heard this idea and they thought, oh, yeah, that's kind of like we say there's strategic and tactical HCM, or there's hard and soft HCM, or there's direct and indirect HCM. It's just this idea that some areas of HCM are very easily quantifiable, especially from a financial standpoint. A lot of it has to do with compliance or with a heavy administrative load, trying to automate that to gain newfound efficiencies. So whenever you make improvements here, you can really quantify how it improved, whether it's risk mitigation in terms of we likely avoided paying X amount of dollars in penalties or fees because we're no longer running a field of the regulatory landscape, or we've saved this much time trying to comply. That's very quantifiable labor expenditure savings, or just things like scheduling, how long it takes to make schedules, this sort of stuff. It's all very quantifiable. It has to do with heavy administration or compliance, and there can be very easily found efficiencies in that. That's concrete HCM. But then you look at the other side of HCM, which is all that stuff that you want to do, but maybe you don't have enough time to do, or because you're so mired in the concrete HCM, because maybe you don't have the right type of technology in place to automate a lot of it or make it easier. But it's all this stuff around employee experience, employee sentiment, decreasing staff anxiety, overpay, flexible scheduling for work-life balance if you're in the retail space. I won't go down the entire list here, but this is about employer brand. This is about all sorts of things. And what's really, really interesting about the two hemispheres of HCM is that most domains or areas of HCM or activities in it have a concrete and an abstract side to them. So there's sort of two sides to the coin. I know we're talking about global payroll today, but just humor me for a moment. Think about talent acquisition. There are very definable, very quantifiable things you can do in terms of labor efficiencies in recruiting, right? You shorten your time to fill, that's time saved. That translates to a savings in a labor expenditure, this sort of thing, right? You've lessened the administrative load or the tedium for recruiters so they can be more efficient. But there's also, that's the concrete side, but then there's the abstract side of talent acquisition. You have potential candidates that encounter a clunky system, maybe an applicant tracking system, and they go away. They abandon the process, and there's an unknown lost opportunity cost there in terms of top talent that you never got to work for your organization. And that's very hard to quantify financially because you don't know exactly how many there were, but at the same time you absolutely know it's there. And then also you think about recruiters. They are the tip of the spear for your employer brand, and so if they aren't equipped, if they're ill-equipped or improperly equipped, or maybe they're just not into their job, they're leaving a bad taste in the mouth of every single candidate that they come into contact with, and that has a very difficult to quantify effect on your employer brand. But again, we know it's there. It's just tough to capture in an accounting spreadsheet. So that there's all of these types of things. Whatever you look at in HCM, there's these abstract and concrete sides to them. Now, some of you may beg to differ or argue a little bit with this, and that's fine. But just for the sake of the conversation today, I'm going to just put a stake in the ground here and say that payroll is simultaneously the most concrete and abstract domain of HCM. And here's my reasoning. It is about survival and it is about feelings. If you want to think about abstract HCM as having all that stuff that has an impact on employee and talent sentiment, that's all feelings-based. And you think about concrete HCM as having all that stuff having to do with just the nuts and bolts of being and the sort of the givens and sort of basic expectations of being employed. That's all survival, right? So your pay is all about survival. Can I get by on this pay? Will I get paid on time correctly? And it's also about your feelings as an employee, right? Am I paid what I'm worth? Are they treating me right in terms of pay? Is this remuneration fair? I use remuneration because I didn't want to say pay twice in that particular set of bullet points, but you know what I mean. It's very interesting how these two things are so just right there, almost in your face when it comes to payroll. And I just find that incredibly fascinating. And that's actually a nice segue into the essential premise of today's webinar, and that is the CFO and the CHRO and how payroll data helps them both in their decision making. So let's talk a little bit first about what the CFO needs. There are all sorts of things the CFO needs, and there's plenty of things that aren't on this list. We just thought that these were 5 pretty important things the CFO needs. One is understanding of enterprise SaaS ROI, right? Ways to mitigate risk, financial and other, ability to forecast global enterprise budget, accuracy in operational expenses, and internal controls. They need all of that. Then you look at what the CHRO needs, 5 things. Again, CHRO needs all sorts of things. These are 5 things that we think are pretty important. Value. They need value from the global HCM solutions. They need a view into workforce compliance. They need a positive global employee experience. They need to show their strategic value to the C-suite. And they need tools to monitor and drive DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, what's interesting about all of this is that what the CFO needs is more concrete, not entirely concrete, but much more concrete. And what the CHRO needs is not entirely abstract, but it is much more abstract than what the CFO needs. We're talking about the employees of the organization versus the financials of the organization. And so I thought that was just a very, very interesting tie-in here against the backdrop of payroll being the most abstract and concrete aspect of HCM, in my opinion anyway. Now, Conrad, I know that you have a few things to add here in terms of how global payroll data can help with these aspects of what the CHRO needs and what the CFO needs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brent. Thanks for the introduction, and same to Tiffany from earlier. So I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about analytics, super passionate about it. And I'm really excited about kind of Immedis' vision and how global payroll is gonna really help the CHRO and the CFO making better decisions. It's gonna be a real driving factor in reducing time that your payroll teams are spending pulling together reports from lots of different areas, and it's going to increase the level of insight that you can actually provide to your CFO or your CHRO based on that data, because it's just that it's there for you. It's in one place. You can go into a report and you can see across from the US to Ecuador to the UK what are people getting paid there? How does that compare to another part of my business? What departments are my highest costs across the whole organization? It's just such a powerful tool that would historically have taken a long time to pull together, because disparate data sources are coming from each of these countries. You're having to stitch them together, and then by the time that you have that data, maybe it's a month, maybe it's a few weeks later, and the decisions that you make on them are still relevant but maybe outdated. So the power of global analytics in payroll is huge, because you have immediate, as soon as your gross to nets are approved in each country, you have immediate access to that data, and you can make decisions based on that data straight away. So with that in mind, I'm just going to bring it back to the CHRO and the CFO. So these reports that we have in the Immedis platform, they reduce risks associated with payroll and increase operational insights. So that's the key, really. And I'll go through some of these in more detail shortly, but we have a series of setup reports that make sure that the inputs that you're giving us are correct, so that on your team side, you're providing us with the correct inputs. There are controls in place to say this is higher than last month, that you should, like, it is, and that's a real call out to make sure that it's correct. And it also helps onboard new customers quicker, so they can see what they're missing, and they can download that data to quickly address the missing data in the platform. We then have variance reports. So after a gross to net is processed, one of the biggest things the CFO is interested in is what's the risk associated with payroll. And if someone has accidentally been paid massively more than they should have been, or the other way, they haven't been paid correctly, we want to know about that before it becomes either an issue for the company and paying an employee too much. And also, to Brent's point earlier, it's more of a employee-centered thing of, have I been paid correctly, and how does that make you feel about your employer if you have not been paid correctly? That's something that our customers are very cognizant of, that if their staff are paid incorrectly, that's a huge thing that staff member is, it's going to dwell on their mind, right? So we want to make sure that is absolutely as accurate as it possibly can be. And these variance reports very quickly highlight changes on month to month. What's different? If there is a difference, what's that down to? Is that a bonus, or has their salary been incorrectly adjusted? So I'll get into that in more detail in a second. We also have some D&I reports that I will again speak to shortly. We have flash reporting, so that you can very quickly get a glance of, across your pay groups, across your countries, over time, what have the trends been in those areas, and everything is explorable, so you can very quickly filter to one pay group and see that trend over time, and it's a very powerful tool. We also have, kind of from the HR side, some movements dashboards, so you can see the joiners and leavers, what's the churn been like in your company, and that can help the CHRO. And then we also have service management reports, so we give access to customers to how we're performing in terms of timeliness and the accuracy of our payrolls as well. So that's something on the abstract side that is very important to customers. It's both concrete and abstract, and there's a target associated with it, but what's the knock-on effect of not making those targets? And we're very transparent around that as well. So let me just move on to the next slide. So mitigating risk in payroll. I spoke about this on the last slide, but yeah, it's all to do with variance reporting. How, as I mentioned, how's a particular pay element changed month to month? How has an employee's pay changed month to month? And that's one of the other real powers of global analytics is, in Immedis in particular, is that you get that data to the lowest level of granularity. So you can drill into what's happened to an employee in March 2019 with their pension contribution. How is that different to this March? And you can really get down to the most granular level of detail, and that's accessible through these variance reports. So you can see exactly what's changed, and it's just another control that goes above and beyond kind of, imagine in the old process, right? You get your gross to net back. You then have to, for every country, you would have to convert that into an Excel template that you have, apply your conditional formatting or whatever kind of transformations you're performing, and then get to the answer. And that could take days, and it could be a very stressful period for a payroll operator. So to have these reports immediately accessible as soon as the gross to net is ready for approval is so powerful, because you can really, it removes a lot of that stress from, I want to know, does everything look correct? Does everything look the same? And yes, it does, because the report is showing you that it does. And you go from having to know the absolute detail, and we should always know the detail of what's happened in a payroll, but it removes it from the payroll operator in one of our customers' companies, because they don't have to know exactly, they don't have to look at a gross to net and say, oh, I know this person got paid this amount last month, and they don't have to store that information month in, month out. The reports will just show them if there's a problem. And that's really powerful. It takes away all of that stress around approving gross to nets, approving payroll, and it just takes such a big burden off of the operators, so that they can then get onto some of the more interesting and more joyous tasks, such as looking for insights in their data to feed into the CFO and the CHRO. So some of those insights may be, in the case of the CHRO, how do we drive diversity and inclusion? Within Immedis, we capture a lot of employee-specific information to do with gender, and to do with all of the fields that are mandatory to process payroll in each of your global countries. So we can see by gender and by age, what is the distribution of your pay? And that can maybe go above and beyond what some HCM systems can offer, where you can see, okay, what are my employees' salaries? You can see exactly what their net pay was, exactly what their notional pay was as well. So how do pension contributions vary between genders? Are there any trends there? How can we, as a HR team, as a payroll team, but feeding into the CHRO, how can we provide them with insight that they can then use to maybe create initiatives to help drive increased pension contributions within their company, and show them that sort of information. So, but this sort of reporting is an amazing feature, and because of the sort of time savings and the ease at which the Immedis platform kind of lets you do your monthly payroll, you get that time back, and you get to see and investigate these reports that can drive the business forward in other areas, and provide insights that were not previously, or may not have previously been possible. And I'll just briefly, on the movements dashboard, we can see kind of the churn of employees within a company, and we can see trends of where that's happening. We can look at that across, again, gender, if we're interested in that, and make sure that, we're, as a CHRO, you're meeting your targets around diversity and inclusion, and how you can actually get there.
Yeah, and we've had just a couple of questions come in related to the reporting and analytics that are available. So Conrad and Brent, if you guys don't mind, I'll pause you for just a second. And the first I would throw out to both of you, as you think about the work that you've done with CHROs and CFOs, where's the typical CHRO or CFO in their data journey? What's their overall kind of level of savviness around reporting? What types of data are they looking for? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'll throw this over to Brent.
Go ahead. Well, you know, it's interesting. Obviously, the CFO, and I think Conrad will probably have a little bit more color here, but the CFO is typically sort of a numbers-driven sort of person, right? And the CHRO is not as much necessarily, but at the same time, there's been an overall trend in the HR space to be much more data savvy. So, you know, I think in general, HR departments are clamoring for more data, more of that information, whereas the CFO is more used to having data. So that's those are my initial thoughts in that regard. That the CFO, this might seem more familiar to a CFO than to a CHRO, but each of them understands the importance of it, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with any executive in a business, they're more, you do get the occasional unicorn and who really likes to get into the detail and really likes to explore, give them a dashboard and they really like to get into it, explore every avenue and kind of come to their own conclusions. But in reporting, we talk about exploratory and explanatory sort of dashboards and data a lot. And what we kind of offer our customers is that exploratory feel, so they can filter everything and they can kind of have some insights highlighted to them in the case of those variance reports and the diversity and inclusions, but maybe you have to just do a couple of filters to say, okay, I've drilled down from this to this to this, and now I can see that in Ireland, as an example, our gender split is 80% men to 20% women, whereas in the UK it's 50-50, but we were just looking at it as UK and Ireland, and we were lumping them together. So once you've got down to that drill down, to that specificity, you can then go to your CFO, your CHRO, and you can say, this is the insight that we're seeing, and you can share that. You can download the image of the dashboard, you can download the data, and you can just give them a very focused message which they're interested in. So more of an explanatory kind of piece of data, which is saying this is what we're seeing, and then here's a plan to address. Here's our kind of thoughts of how maybe we could address it. And that's something that we see, that in my experience of kind of data analytics and reporting, that's something that works really well with those executives and including the CHR and CFO.
Yeah, it's fantastic to hear that you can make them to the level of specificity that suits the need of the business or a particular decision, right, or an insight that someone may be looking for to make a decision. Brent, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's a great point too. I find it very fascinating that, you know, this, when you're talking about DE&I stats like you were just talking about, Conrad, I mean, there is a potential compliance aspect angle to that as well, right? And so this is almost mission critical for organizations to have that ability to understand that breakdown per region, because that's a regulatory landscape that varies quite a bit from region to region, and still it's developing. So in my mind, that's a big compliance need as well. So that's just another compelling rationale to have this type of this level of visibility. One other thing, observation I just wanted to share based off some of the things you were saying, Conrad, is around this idea of there's an efficiency aspect to reporting, right? And if you're spending all your time just trying to pull the reports, you have that much less time, or potentially no time at all, to actually analyze them, right? You're always in reactive mode and this sort of thing. And just in my experience, having been in the space for a bit, and having looked at a number of HCM deployments over the years, I know that we'll put it this way, I've never met a payroll department director that wasn't excited about spending less time trying to pull reports and more time just having them and being able to analyze them and to provide greater value to the organization.
Absolutely, completely agree. Yep. And we'll come back to the remainder of the questions at the end. So Brent, if you want to carry on.
Yeah, sure. So, I don't know if we're going to hit on all of these needs in terms of the type of data that a modern global payroll system can provide, and the analytics that it can provide around reporting it can provide around that. But there's all sorts of things, again, that the CHRO needs, and also that the CFO needs, but if you think about it in a holistic sense, there was a very interesting idea that came out in the past few years. It was actually, I think it was 2019. Don't hold me to that. It might have been 2018, but I think it was 19. Accenture, of all places, they came up with this idea of whole brain leadership in the C-suite. And I read about it, and I thought, gosh, this sounds a little bit like concrete and abstract HCM. And then after a short bout of saying, oh, I hope I didn't copy their idea, and I don't think I did. I had a short scare there, and then I realized, no. I think it's just another way of looking at it. There's this idea that, and I forget the actual stats, but it's actually right there. 8% of leaders. Okay, a whole brain approach already showed 22% stronger 3-year revenue growth and 34% stronger growth in EBITDA. So there's this idea that if you're in the C-suite and you're thinking more like left brain, right brain at the same time, your whole brain, and they talk about the left brain and the right brain in their research and their thought leadership, at Accenture, then you're going to be a better leader. You're going to lead to a greater revenue for your organization. And so I just thought that was pretty interesting in terms of the CHRO and the CFO working together, sort of taking that left brain approach and that right brain approach. And I might be actually switching them up by accident here, but one is more analytical and numbers driven. The other is a little bit more creative and people driven. You take those two sides of the brain though, and you kind of match them up, and together they're stronger, and it's good for the C-suite in general. So I thought that's an important point to make, I think, in terms of providing data from global payroll that can help the CFO and the CHRO to be better in their roles. And in that way, I think that CFO and CHRO decision making are two sides of one coin, in a sense, right? Conrad was talking a few minutes ago around this idea that finding all those reports can take a lot of time. So that's an efficiency, an inefficiency that you're experiencing if you have sort of a suboptimal system for it. But at the same time, it is stressful for even the payroll department to pull those reports when it's taking so long. And so there's an employee sentiment issue there too within your payroll department specifically. If you look at global payroll analytics, and thinking about the hemispheres and CFO and CHRO, there's actually a lot of overlap there in terms of common goals for I would say common goals for the organization. One question that I have, I guess, is I want to just throw it out there, is how can CHROs and CFOs kind of align their efforts for mutual benefit with access to these to a better aggregated data set that's more readily accessible to them in global payroll specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have different levels of controls within the Immedis platform that enable different users to have access to different levels of the data. And within the reporting specifically, we're really trying to move towards a persona-based set of reporting dashboards. So rather than having everyone log in and have access to the same reports, we have we have a sort of HR persona and we have a finance persona. And in this case, the CFO and the CHRO, they could have access to these reports. Maybe someone in their team would have access to them. And as I mentioned earlier, would kind of be able to quickly take a question from the CFO if they come in and say, how have pension contributions been in 2021 compared to this bit? They can ask someone from their team that question, and the power of this for them is they can get an insight extremely quickly. They can get that insight because the data is all there and available, and you can filter and drill down. You can get that insight as quickly as the finance member can get into the tool and start exploring. So you can really quickly get there, and you can actually have a meeting with your works really well with these people. You can talk to them and have the tool open rather than having to do the filtering offline and then take a screenshot and send it to them, email it to them. If you can get some time with that person and you can do that analysis, a lot of the time the people they know what they want, but they maybe don't. They know what they want, and then that creates a new question and creates a new question and a new question. Whereas if you're in front of them, you can really quickly drag and filter and quickly get to that first answer. And then they ask, okay, well, I'm interested in pensions, but now actually I want to see all the notional pay elements. That's what I'm really interested in. And rather than you having to then go back into the tool and rerun the same or redo the filtering, you can just build that in front of them and you can show them exactly what they need. So it gives you a way of communicating better with your CFO and your CHRO. If you can speak to them with the tool open, you can both kind of get to the answers together.
That's really interesting. It's almost as if it facilitates more easier ideation, maybe. If you have you have a question coming from a question, and you don't have to run these reports again. There's an efficiency to the thought flow, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the previous model of BI teams was sort of that. It was, I have this question. The BI team would go and they'd create a SQL query, a database query, and then they would return kind of maybe an Excel or a bit of data. And that process would take quite a long time. And it requires a lot of technical skill to do that maybe a finance team member wouldn't have. And you might not have the control. You might not have the controls in your system to enable the right level of access to those people. With where data is going in general is allowing more of the self-service of analytics. So giving people their access to their data and letting them play with it and answer their own questions. And so we're seeing a lot of, I've seen a lot of people go from, with the tools such as Tableau or Power BI, people in key kind of business operations teams, finance teams, having access to these licenses and being able to drive a lot of this reporting themselves. So it's kind of going away from the BI team owns everything. The BI team owns the state of the data and make sure that the data is accurate and correct, and then actually can enable the rest of the business by giving them access to it. So that's kind of where analytics is going within organizations generally.
So a decentralization of control over the analytics, right? Yeah. That fits into one of our themes for 2022 around HCM and how that I'm toying with a blog entry that will be called "We're all HCM practitioners now." It's this idea that will play on a saying, but it's this idea that a lot of that those analytics can be pushed right out to the line managers or whatever, right? And then so it's not, which is outside sort of HR's inherent domain, but doesn't have to be outside their purview necessarily. And that's why analytics are so important to HR as well. But yeah, this general move toward decentralization, I think, is generally good. I think I see it as a good trend. I think it's good for organizations in general. One thing that I wanted to that jumped to mind, just going back to this idea of CHROs and CFOs mutually benefiting from greater alignment with global payroll data being maybe that part of that secret sauce, right? In my opinion, if you have, this changes the dynamic, right? So for the longest time, HR leaders have been sort of pounding at the doors. They've been at the gate saying, please, please, please understand, we need more employee engagements. It's important. Employee sentiment is important. And of course, in the past couple of years, that message has gone through a little bit in terms of the employee experience because of the pandemic and the move to hybrid and work at home and all of that, right? But what's interesting about when you have a data set like global payroll and having it being readily available with all these efficiencies around reporting and everything that we've discussed today, change the dynamic a little bit where you may actually have the CFO or the finance team going to the HR team to ask a question. Gee, we've noticed this thing. What can we do about it? And so it changed the dynamic, and this is now the finance going to HR, and HR gets to answer the question as opposed to trying to convince or persuade the finance department to care more about employee sentiment. Now the HR department can say, well, that has to do with employee sentiment, or that this might have something to do with the solution. So it changes the dynamic, which I think is a very welcome development in the space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Tiffany, do we have any more questions? I just encourage anyone to add their own as well.
Absolutely. For anyone that has questions they haven't sent in, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. We do have a few that have been queued up during the planned content, so I'll ask those of you guys now. And the first one is related to someone that's a newcomer to data and reporting. And I can imagine as someone that's new to this area, seeing maybe the reports look a little daunting, right? There's a ton of great information, but how do I even go about getting up to speed on these reports? So can you guys talk about, if it's someone who is new, what that journey looks like as they start to get more familiar with accessing data and making informed decisions based upon it?
Absolutely. So here at Immedis, we have a pretty extensive training academy that people can enroll in, and also all of the analytics, all the reports and the functionality that is used in those reports around filtering, around drill down. That's all present within that training academy. So you can go and you can get kind of upskilled on how to interact with the reports. On top of that, when we release a new report, we send out kind of a user manual, user guide to our customers so that they know what it is and how you interact with it again. And so that's another form. And then finally, we have customer engagement partners, and they're always trying to make sure that our customers are getting the most out of the platform that they possibly can. So they're there to also assist in the training of customers with the analytics tools to make sure that they can get the data that they need.
Awesome. And Conrad, related to that as well, what if someone is looking for a report that they didn't see shown or isn't available in the system?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So at the moment, what we've shown today is it's visualizations and it's ways of quickly identifying trends within your data, understanding whether it reconciles, whether the validation is kind of correct. But you may kind of come into a situation where you want to either download that data, that specific data, or you want to download the data to do your own analysis. And within our platform, you can actually specify a date range, use the filters to understand what data you need to download. And then you can download that data and explore it in the ways that you want. We know that some of our customers import that data into accounting, into their accounting service as well. So there's that download functionality that you can use. And then finally, if there's a report that you really want to see month in, month out, and you don't want to go through that, you want to cut out that process of having to download and build that report again, that's something that you can engage the Immedis analytics team with, and we can, as an add-on service, we can build custom reports for customers as well. So that's how you can interact with us.
Fabulous. Thanks, Connor. The next question, one of the things that you guys spoke about a few minutes ago was getting the data in the hands of the business. And so now, right, with the direction that we've gone in terms of reporting and getting that into the hands of the people in the business is with that insight into the analytics, into global payroll, and what that gives to CFOs and CHROs, how does their newfound visibility into the global enterprise help them to better align their efforts in a mutually beneficial way to advance the success of the overall organization?
Well, there's all sorts of possibilities there, and I'm sure Conrad will have more to add. But some things that come to mind right off the bat is you can, let's say you're an organization that uses OKRs, right? You're going to be able to make those more accurate, more realistic vis-a-vis organizational goals. You're going to you'll have a better grasp on what exactly you need to do with your performance, your people enablement. I've heard that term as opposed to performance management recently, and I prefer it, frankly. But you're able to align those performance, I almost said performance management, those people enablement activities. It's pretty big. I mean, I don't want to run too far afield here, but also there's there's AI and how it's becoming more and more of a factor as well, and also helping people in the organization interpret that data and be more aligned with organizational goals, help with talent planning, right? If you have more insight into budgetary constraints and whatnot, you can help. You can get better at planning your teams and who's going to be on the teams for certain goals. Certain projects, and whether those are indeed aligned with organizational imperatives and these sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, I think there is a speed element of being able to you have that data sooner with a global payroll solution. You have it at your fingertips really quickly, but it also enhances your decision making. So whereas before you maybe are making decisions based on feelings and what you're hearing from some people, and particularly with data, those conversations can be very siloed, so they can be, it's quite a private thing, really, right? Isn't it? So how much you get paid as a business and as an HR team, a lot of those conversations are private, individual to individual, but you can get a sense of across your whole business what is going on, and you can enhance the amount of information that you have going into making that decision. So rather than saying, as Brent was alluding to, if you have a HR complaint around pay, you can kind of very quickly benchmark sort of this is what the standard is. This is what our bands are. These are all of this sort of information you can get to very quickly. So it's the speed at which you can make decisions and the quality of the decisions you make because you have more information at your fingertips. To me,
I'm very. Go ahead, Brent.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to put a bow on what Conrad said, because we're actually talking about organizational agility, right? We're very much affecting that positively with that immediacy, the speed at which that data is available, the immediacy of it. So, and agility is a huge area of interest currently.
Absolutely. And related to that, we've heard about all of the things that analytics and data can provide, but are there any limits in terms of global payroll analytics' ability to inform the decision-making by a CHRO or a CFO?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. I think as Immedis is kind of on a journey at the moment where we're a relatively new company, and we're every year on year out, we're adding more and more functionality. We're kind of enhancing our capabilities, right? As of right now, some of the limitations are around what data that we handle. So within the GDPR, you're really trying to handle as little personal information as you can. And payroll is some of the most personal, requires a lot of the most personal information, if not the most personal information that you have. What's your pay? Where do you live? What's your bank account details? And in different countries, those fields are different. So in Germany, you maybe need to know any dependents and who those dependents are and what age your dependents are. And that all factors into how your payroll is calculated. Whereas in the UK, you don't have that. So you don't have to provide that information. So there are some gaps in data that, depending on the country, you may have incredibly rich data on the demographics of your workforce. Whereas in other areas, perhaps you don't have that level of richness because the payroll is a lot simpler. So when you're looking, that's one limitation of global payroll, is if you are trying to answer a question of, for example, race maybe is not something that's relevant to, is not relevant to payroll processing in the UK. It wouldn't change how much you get paid, but in some countries, that is important. For example, in Canada, if you're a native Canadian, you don't pay tax. So it is very important to your payroll. Whereas with our diversity and inclusion reports, maybe you'd want to see how pay is distributed across some of your diversity and inclusion metrics that just they're not captured by a payroll software because you don't need them, and you don't want to process that data because it's kind of not aligned with GDPR, right? So that's one limitation, is just the complexity of payroll. Some fields are not required in certain countries, they are required in others, and maybe it'd be great if you could report on those things, but that's just one of the limitations that we have.
And it's very interesting that the, of course, the regulatory landscape is a limiting factor in terms of the type of insight that you can provide across the board versus just regionally. And I think it just underscores the complexity involved in making this data so readily available to leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something I think that the more data you have, the more data you want to get your hands on to be able to analyze and help inform things around the business. Brent, Conrad, any last thoughts or insights that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up today?
Well, I'll just say that thank you for having me, and this has been a really, really interesting conversation, and I love the way that global payroll data of all things can be a real sort of a unifying factor when it comes to helping the C-suite think in both abstract and concrete ways together for the benefit of the organization. That's what really strikes me about this conversation. I find so fascinating.
Yeah. Just to echo that, thanks so much for listening. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about this. I'm really excited with where global payroll analytics is at the moment, but also where it's going. I think it's just going to continue to become a larger and larger part of the payroll team's toolkit. They're just going to be able to enable their teams and empower their teams to do more and help their businesses do more as well. So I'm really excited. So thanks for listening.
Wonderful. Thanks so much to you both. And for anyone in the audience who's interested in learning more about either 360 Insights or Immedis, you can access information available via the sources that you see here on the screen. And as a reminder, we will have the on-demand version of the recording available to consume later or to share with any of your peers and teammates that may be interested in learning more about data and analytics as well. And with that, thank you all for joining. Thank you so much, Brent and Conrad, for all of the insights that you shared. And for our audience, we hope that you found this session to be both interesting and informative. And we wish you happy data and analyzing. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.